As we start today's mini lesson, let me first remind you of the voices in a reader's head. We've been learning to use our reading voice to sound out the words, but to also make sure it's talking to our thinking voice, because it can have a lot of different thoughts. So far this year, we've learned that we can retell and summarize what we read, and we can determine the most important information, the main ideas. We can also see things in our mind even when there's no pictures. We've learned to start asking questions when we read and make connections. Today, I want to introduce you to synthesizing, the last way to think. Now, synthesis is awesome because it's so powerful. And to really understand its power, I want to quickly review how the other inferences or types of thoughts work. When we read a few lines and we have a thought. We read a few more lines and have a thought. And we keep this reading voice, thinking voice conversation going on all through the text. But every once in a while, we read something, have a thought, and then another thought, and another thought. And we keep thinking about what we just read. We can't stop thinking about it. And after we've had multiple thoughts, we've realized something, we've learned something, we've discovered something we didn't know before. That is a synthesis. You know what synthesis is a lot like? It's a lot like baking a cake. When you first buy a cake mix and you open it up and you pour the powder into the bowl, you don't have much right away. It's not until you add the ingredients. So you start with the powder, but that's all you have until you add the water, and then the oil, and then the eggs. After adding those ingredients and mixing them up, you have to combine them. Then putting it in the oven forms a cake. That whole cake baking process is exactly how synthesizing works for readers. You see, you have the cake mix, the powder, that's your text. And you open it up and you pour some in the bowl. That's you reading and having a thought about what's been read. You read a little more and think about it. Read a little more and think about it. But every once in a while, you read something and you think more than just a moment about it. You are thinking about it and it makes you wonder. It reminds you of other texts you've read, experiences you've had. It reminds you of things you've learned previously and what experts say or other perspectives on this topic. It makes you start to think about nagging questions, things you're wondering about or curious about. You might think about what was going on in the setting, what was happening in that time period. We're considering everything about the text, including our emotions. What are we thinking about? What are we wondering about? How are we feeling? And when we put any of these extra thoughts into our first thought, and we start to mix it and combine it and really consider it, what we have when we're done is a brand new thought, a synthesis. Using this character to remind us of our reading voice and thinking voice, I want to show you the difference between a synthesis type of thoughts and the other inferences. Instead of using print text, though, I'm going to use a visual text. Here's a photo of my 3 kids, and I could think in the form of a retelling, and I could retell about the time that our family went to the Hard Rock Cafe. Or I could retell about this one. This is a time when we went to Yellowstone. That's what I'm reading about or remembering, but oh man, the visualizations that I could create would be fabulous. And here's another text, again of my 3 kids, and I could think about it in the form of a connection, a text-to-self connection, when my parents made me read when I was a kid. Have you ever done that? Pulled out a bunch of old photos and started flipping through them or scrolling through them on one of your devices, and you're quickly moving through those. That's the text, and you're having a quick thought about each one. But every once in a while, you get to a photo or you flip to a photo and you pause. You're going to be there a little longer because you're not just having one thought, you're having several thoughts. This is you having a synthesis. When I was first going through the photos and I looked at each one, I had a quick thought and moved on until I got to this one. When I first look at this photo, I immediately go into a retelling mode. And I remember when Nana came and visited my kids in 2004. But there's so much to this photo, so much happening in my mind that I keep thinking. Like, I start to think about when this happened. I consider the setting, and yeah, it was 2004, but she came from Wisconsin. Nana drove 2 days down from Wisconsin 12 years ago. Look how young my kids are. As I keep looking at this picture, I have to just remember how fun it was. I'm just taking in the emotion and remembering how much laughter the kids exuded that day when playing perfection. Nana would start to scream every time that board popped up, and the kids would laugh. That memory causes me to ponder and pull back on some of my own background knowledge about when I was a kid. And my grandparents came to visit me, but not often, only like 1 time or 2 times a year. I didn't see my grandparents very often. They lived far away. Now, some people think that that's kind of sad. Their perspective is that I really missed out. But you know what? It wasn't sad for me. It was just normal. It's the way things were. You know what? As I look back and I think back about that visit and so many others, you know what I'm realizing? You know what I'm synthesizing? I'm realizing there's a kind of a perk for grandparents living far away. Yeah, they only visit every once in a while, but those visits are so special. They're so special because we cram like a year's worth of fun into just a couple days. Did you see it? Did you see what happened there? I had a synthesis. Did you notice how I looked at the picture and I said, I remember 2004 when Nana came to visit. But then I paused and another thought came in. And I wrote it down. I gave you another thought, and then I paused and another thought popped in my mind and another thought, and it kept going. I didn't know how many were going to come, but after I paused and had several thoughts, I paused once more. That was me combining, mixing my thinking. And that's when I realized, you know what? I don't think it was sad that I didn't see my grandparents very often. In fact, it made it kind of extra special. It was the perk. That was my synthesis. I hadn't stopped to think about that before. I realized that when looking at that picture and taking into account all of my thoughts. So today's lesson was the beginning of this idea of synthesizing. It's another type of reader thought. The thinking voice can synthesize. And it's this powerful inference that your mind can make by simply reading the text and thinking, adding, combining, mixing, and producing a brand new realization. You learned something you didn't consider before.